Before Australia became a Wagyu powerhouse, before the marbling, the awards, the global demand, there was a beginning no one talks about. A beginning far from Japan, forged under harsher skies and on wider plains. What happened here reshaped the future of Wagyu, not by imitation, but by ambition. And this land welcomes anyone willing to understand its fire. Come closer. See how a new Wagyu identity was born, one the world never expected. This is the untold story of Australian Wagyu.
Australia's Wagyu story didn't begin with fame. It began quietly, with a few strands of Japanese genetics moving secretly across oceans. In the late 1980s, a small group of Australian breeders started importing frozen Wagyu embryos from Japan. Not many, just enough to spark a question. Could Wagyu survive here, in a land built on heat, drought, and distance? For a while, no one knew. Then came the turning point. In 1990, the first live Wagyu ever recorded in Australia arrived, a heifer named Kobeef Kinu. Her exact path is still debated. Some trace her journey through the United States, others to earlier transfers from Japan. But whichever path she took, her arrival changed everything. Those early embryos, semen vials, and rare lineage cattle became the foundation of Australia's first Wagyu crosses, half Japanese, half Australian. A bold experiment with no guaranteed outcome. Yet something remarkable happened. The cattle adapted. They grew. And their marbling, even in the early generations, hinted at a future no one had imagined. What began as a quiet genetic project was becoming the beginning of a global Wagyu powerhouse. This was the true start of Australian Wagyu.
Through the early 1990s, Australia's Wagyu herd grew quickly, not through cloning or shortcuts, but through careful selection and patience. The first animals were crossbred, Wagyu combined with Angus and Shorthorn, creating cattle that could handle Australia's vast distances, intense heat, and the hard, open country. Crossbreeding was essential in the beginning. It allowed breeders to test temperament, feed efficiency, and marbling potential long before full-blood genetics became available. But the real transformation began later. In 1997, and again in 1999, Australia received the final full-blood Wagyu ever exported from Japan. These shipments were tiny, just a handful of animals, but each carried bloodlines that shaped Wagyu for generations. Names like Tajima, Kadaka, and Fujiyoshi, lines known for balance, refinement, and extraordinary marbling, now lived beneath Australian skies. With them came an entirely new philosophy of breeding. Australia embraced data, ultrasound scans, and long-term genetic planning in a way that differed from the traditional Japanese approach. Slowly, the herd multiplied. Full-blood calves were born on ranches that had never seen Wagyu before. Breeders refined feeding programs, adapted to the climate, and recorded every trait with scientific precision. From just a few embryos and a few live animals, Australia built the largest full-blood Wagyu population outside Japan. A herd shaped by patience, discipline, and a quiet belief that Wagyu could thrive far from its birthplace.
Japan shaped Wagyu in narrow valleys and quiet farms, but Australia forged its identity under wide, open skies, a landscape that stretches further than the eye can follow. Here, cattle begin on grass, long early months spent walking, grazing, moving freely. It builds muscle, it builds calm, and calm cattle marble better. Then comes the long transformation, an extended grain finish, 300, 400, sometimes 500 days. Quiet days, predictable days, not rushed, not forced, just time, working its way through genetics. Australia learned to balance two worlds, the delicacy of Japanese bloodlines, and a continent built on heat, drought, and distance. A place where every rancher must think ahead. Feed, water, stress, shade. Nothing is accidental. Low-stress handling, clean feed, vast space. These shaped marbling patterns unlike anywhere else. Patterns that grow slowly, evenly, consistently. Not the dense snowflake web of Japan, fine and intricate like brushwork. Not the bold beefiness of American crosses, heavier, louder, unmistakably Angus-influenced. But something in between, silky, structured, and steady. A marbling that carries the calm of wide horizons. And when the grading came, Australia created its own standard, MS, from 0 to the rare 9+. A scale built not for perfection, but for truth. Only a tiny fraction ever reach it. But when they do, they show what distance, climate, and patience created. A Wagyu shaped by Australia and defined by discipline.
Not all Wagyu carries the same lineage. In Australia, the story divides into 3 paths. Full-blood, born entirely from Japanese genetics, preserved generation after generation. No crossings, no interruptions. A direct line back to Tajima, Kadaka, Fujiyoshi, and the cattle that began it all. Purebred, built through careful back crossing. A methodical rise to over 93% Wagyu. Close in character, close in flavor. A bridge between purity and practicality. And crossbred, the meeting point of Wagyu and Angus or Shorthorn. Bigger frames, bolder beefiness, and a different expression of marbling. Each path offers something its own, intensity, balance, or richness. But full-blood, that is the unbroken thread. The heritage Australia protects, and the benchmark the world follows.
Wagyu may have begun in Japan, but its story did not end there. To understand Australian Wagyu, you must understand the 2 giants standing on either side of it. The nation that created the legend, and the nation that reinvented its strength. Japan, the birthplace of impossibly delicate marbling. Cattle raised in sheltered valleys, fed with precision so tight it borders on ritual. Massaged, brushed, monitored with a patience that can only exist where time itself is treated as a craft. Their meat glows with a pale porcelain richness. Fat arranged in patterns so fine, they look like winter pressed into muscle. A 5 isn't simply a grade, it is a promise that nothing was rushed and nothing was careless. Then came America, a different land, a different hunger. The US didn't want to preserve Wagyu, it wanted to scale it, to cross it with Angus, expand its muscle, deepen its flavor, and create a beef that could thunder on the grill. Bigger frames, thicker cuts, juice and smoke and boldness. Where Japan paints in snowflakes, America paints in fire. And then, Australia, a continent caught between ocean and desert, heat and silence, abundance and scarcity. Here, Wagyu was not sheltered, it was tested. Pure Japanese genetics stepped onto open land, walked long distances, ate grass under a harder sun, and finished on grain for months beyond months, gently marbling in the rhythm of the seasons. Australia didn't chase a 5's richness, nor America's heavy power. It chased harmony, the middle of the spectrum where luxury meets restraint. And in that middle ground, something new appeared. Marbling that melts, but doesn't overwhelm. Beef flavor that rises, but doesn't shout. Cuts that balance silk and structure, sweetness and depth. Japan's genetics and Australia's temperament. This is why the world calls Australian Wagyu a 3rd path. Not imitation, not hybrid bravado, but a philosophy shaped by land and climate, by wide skies, sparse rainfall, and a discipline inherited, not copied. Each country creates Wagyu with its own soul. Japan, precision. America, power. Australia, balance. Three interpretations of the same ancient cattle. Three answers to the same question. What should perfection taste like? And now, you decide which answer speaks to you.
In the end, Australian Wagyu stands apart. Born from rare genetics, but shaped by a land unlike any other. This is Australia's legacy, bold, modern, and unmistakably its own. If this journey inspired you, subscribe, like, and stay with Elementa. The next chapter begins soon.